Behind me are the graves of more than 39,000 German soldiers who never made it home, mostly from the Second World War. I'm standing here in Lommel in Belgium. This is the largest German war cemetery in Western Europe. As you look out on the rows of crosses, it's hard to comprehend a number like 39,000 human lives that were lost. In today's video, we're going to try to go to some of these crosses and learn some of the stories of the individuals who are buried here. This video is not about glorifying the regime that these men fought and died for. It's about expanding our historical understanding of the time period so we can understand why 39,000 plus Germans are lying here on this countryside here in Belgium. This next story is a story of a man who was a baker in his civilian life, turned to the military, and lost his life while fighting in the German army. Let's go to his cross and let's hear his story. How are you? Are you still alive? Bernhard Brutscher's wife wrote those pleading words on the 21st of January 1945. She hadn't received a single sign of life from him since the 13th of December. What she couldn't have known as she sat writing to her husband was that Bernhard had already fallen almost 3 weeks earlier. At home, she and her two young boys, Bernie and Werner, were still waiting for a reply that would never come. Bernhard and his wife married in May of 1939, and soon thereafter their home was filled with the sounds of two baby boys. The children were named Bernhard and Werner. But their time together was cut cruelly short. Barely a year after the wedding, Bernhard was called into military service. He was then stationed in Copenhagen, remaining there until December of 1944 when his unit suddenly was transferred from Denmark to the front lines in Belgium. His last surviving letter from Denmark is dated the 6th of December. In it, Bernhard told his family that he wouldn't be able to write again until he had his new address from the front. Soon after that, the letters simply stopped. In the first days of January 1945, Bernhard fell in Belgium. While the surviving records differ by a single day, his unit's letter states that he fell on the 1st of January, while his biography and the family memorial card says it's the 2nd of January. The exact date changes nothing of the tragedy though. For his parents, Bernhard's death was a blow almost too heavy to bear. That's because Bernhard was the middle of three sons. His younger brother Alois had fallen in Russia on the 14th of February 1944, and his older brother Paul was killed in Romania just months later on the 1st of June. And now Bernhard. In the span of less than 11 months, a mother and a father had lost all three of their boys. But back home, Bernhard's wife and children still didn't know that he was gone. On the 21st of January is when she sat down to write him that letter, where she asked, "How are you? Are you still alive?" She also mentions that the bombing raids were creeping closer to their home, and she wrote to him of her quiet terror, the fear of being left helpless with two young children. She confessed she had almost given up hope of ever seeing him again. Yet, in the middle of all that fear, she still tried to share the beautiful everyday moments that he was missing. She told him of how Bernie had started showing his picture books to his baby brother. She described how Werner would answer with happy sounds of his own, laughing with his entire face. Then she wrote to him what happened when the sirens started. Whenever an air raid began, she would have to wake Werner from a deep sleep, dress him, wrap him tightly in blankets, and carry him down into a cold cellar. And how Bernie didn't want to go down there either. She writes, "If only there was at least a man here with us," she wrote, "then it would not be so bad." And despite the darkness of war, she ended her letter with hope. She wrote, "Hopefully you're still healthy, dear Papa." She sent him greetings and kisses and signed a letter simply from herself with Bernie and Werner. However, Bernhard would never read this letter. A letter informing the family of Bernhard's death had actually been written by his unit on the 17th of January, but this news was delayed. His wife kept writing to her husband well into February, holding out for an answer. Only later did the devastating truth finally arrive. Today, Bernhard Brutscher rests here at the German War Cemetery in Lommel, in Block 59, grave 161. He was just 36 years old. He left behind parents who had lost every son they had, a wife who spent weeks writing to a husband she didn't know was already gone, and 2 little boys who never saw their father come home.
When you hear the words that his wife wrote him, hoping that he was still alive, you forget that he was a soldier, and you remember that he was a husband and a father with a wife left behind in a situation she didn't know how to handle, doing the best she could with her 2 boys, hoping that her husband would come back home. Unfortunately for his wife, he never did. I wanted to share this story with you guys because I think it's important to remember that these individuals also had families, and those families were affected by their deaths for generations to come. In Bernhard's example, not just his wife, but also his kids would have to feel the loss without him.
Before we continue with the personal stories, I want to pause for a moment and give you some context about exactly where we are and how this cemetery came to exist. The peaceful landscape that we see today took shape only after the war had ended. During the final months of the Second World War, the American Graves Registration Service established 4 temporary collection cemeteries across Belgium for both American and German war dead. In 1946 and 1947, the German dead from those cemeteries were brought here to Lommel. Beginning in 1946, the Belgian Burial Service also undertook the immense task of gathering German war dead from graves scattered across the country. Most were reburied here, while a smaller number were taken to a cemetery near Bastogne. Because of this, most of those resting at Lommel did not actually fall in this immediate area. They lost their lives during the fighting in Belgium and Western Germany, particularly around Aachen, the Lüddecke Forest, and the Remagen bridgehead. Today, more than 39,000 people are buried here. Among them are 542 German soldiers from the First World War who were transferred here after the military cemetery at Leopoldsburg was closed. Around 13,000 of those buried at Lommel were originally unidentified. Through decades of painstaking work, the Volksbund has since been able to clarify almost 7,000 of those cases. Following a war graves agreement between Belgium and Germany in 1952, the Volksbund began transforming the grounds into the permanent cemetery we walk through today. Then, in 1954, almost 400 young people from 16 different countries came here to help with that work. From their shared effort grew the Volksbund enduring motto, reconciliation over the graves. The cemetery was officially opened to the public with a commemorative ceremony on the 6th of September 1959. But a number as 39,000, as vast as this, can be difficult to truly comprehend when we're talking about human lives. So let us return to the individual lives behind these numbers. One of those lives was Heinrich Zinke. In December 1944, Heinrich became engaged to Heidi, the woman he loved. Together they began looking forward to the life they hoped to build after the war. Less than 3 months later, that future was gone.
The next story that I want to share with you guys is about a man from Nuremberg. His name was Heinrich Zinke. What makes this story unique is that some of his personal correspondence survived, and through them we can get a glimpse into his mindset.
Heinrich was born in Nuremberg on the 22nd of October 1915. He trained as a toolmaker before volunteering for the Reichswehr in October 1934, shortly before his 19th birthday. The Reichswehr was Germany's interwar armed forces established during the Weimar Republic and replaced by the Wehrmacht in 1935. By December of 1944, Heinrich was stationed in Hilden, where he became engaged to Heidi Weiling. Only 1 month later, he was transferred to the army. By February, he was serving in the West. According to the surviving letters, on the 20th of February 1945, Heinrich began writing to his mother Katharina and his sister Anna. He told them he was still waiting anxiously for news from home, but he also had a rare piece of good news to share with them, and that was that Heidi managed to reach him. Despite a very difficult journey, she had made it safely and was going to stay with him until Sunday. Heinrich had to interrupt writing this letter. When he continued writing on the 22nd of February, his thoughts turned towards home. He had heard 2 Wehrmacht reports monitoring air raids on Nuremberg. Nearly 2 months had passed since he had been home, and he could not understand why no sign of life from his family had reached them. He wrote that he was very worried about them and hoped that they had been spared in the attacks. but for those few days, Heidi was still beside him to comfort him. Times are so hard, Heinrich wrote, and one has to find a little joy so not to be worn down by everyday life. He added that they had to make the most of their time together because nobody could say when they would see each other again. At the end of the letter, Heinrich again expressed his hope that his family had been spared in the air raids. The letter was then signed by them both, Heidi and Heine. 9 days after Heinrich finished that letter, on the 3rd of March, he was severely wounded during the fighting near Bergen, a town just inside the German border with the Netherlands. The notification letter written by his company commander dated the 20th of March stated that Heinrich had died on the 3rd of March. However, a later death certificate instead records his death on the 5th of March, meaning he ultimately succumbed to his wounds 2 days after being injured. His company commander told Heinrich's mother that although Heinrich had only recently joined the unit, he had already become well liked by both his superiors and the men under his command. Heinrich was 29 years old. Heinrich was initially buried in Hüt near the city of Köln, otherwise known as Cologne, before being reburied here at Lommel. Because maintaining thousands of small, scattered burial sites proved impossible in the long term, authorities consolidated them into large permanent cemeteries like this one. That would explain why Heinrich was moved from Germany to Belgium and rests at the cemetery in Lommel, where today he rests in Block 10, Grave 95. His final surviving letter was not about battles or military glory. It was about an unanswered post, worry for his family, and the little happiness he and Heidi were trying to hold on to.
And what makes places like this here in Lommel in Belgium relevant today is that they're places of learning. There's a quote that says, "The graves of the soldiers are the best preachers of peace." And I agree with that, because when you come to a place like this, even though it's beautiful, it's peaceful today, the flowers, the birds are chirping, when you come to a place like this and you see the rows and rows of crosses all around me, it's hard to comprehend what the immense amount of life lost means. It's hard to visualize that. And the crosses play their part, but it's still difficult to visualize that. And when you come to a place like this, you really realize what those numbers on the piece of paper mean, the ones that you learned about in your history books. So over the course of the past few days, I've been here in the Netherlands and in Belgium, and I've been joined by somebody who's helped me a lot with the research. His name is Guus. He's going to help tell me some of the stories of the individuals that are buried here in Lommel today, because he also helped me with some of the research that I did for the individuals here.
Heinz Josef Drauschke was born in Duisburg on the 16th of July, 1925. In September of 1944, he was just 19 years old when his life came to an end here in Belgium. Today, Heinz rests here at Lommel in Block 21, Grave 91. But his full story of what happened to him and the long uncertainty faced by his family is one of the stories at this cemetery that makes us relate at the human level. This is a story that Guus will help us tell.
Heinz Drauschke was born on July 16, 1925 in Duisburg as the son of an assistant locksmith. He worked in a department store until 1942, when he was old enough for his military registration record. Little else is known about his service time, but in late October 1944 he was considered missing, and it was assumed that he had been captured by American forces. In reality, however, he was already been killed on the 18th of September 1944 and initially buried near Stockholm. He only could be recovered several days later due to ongoing fighting. By that time, decomposition was to such an extent that transportation was no longer possible, and they buried him right on the spot where he died. And 1.5 years later, his parents found out what happened to their son.
One has to imagine the uncertainty that Heinz's family was feeling when they had no word from their son. As Guus described to us, this uncertainty can be seen in 2 surviving documents that were sent to his father. More than a month after Heinz disappeared, his commander wrote that he had failed to return following the fighting near Stockholm. His comrades had last seen him in close combat, but nobody knew what had happened afterwards. The commander believed Heinz had probably been captured by American forces. He ended the letter by expressing the hope that once the war was over, Heinz would return home safely. For his parents, the letter gave him something to hold on to, the possibility that their son was still alive somewhere in captivity. However, the surviving Red Cross letter dated the 21st of October, 1946, more than 2 years after Heinz had fallen. Based on statements from witnesses at the battle, it finally confirmed that Heinz had lost his life there on the 18th of September, 1944. The first letter had given his parents hope that their son might still return home to them. The second finally crushed that hope and told them that Heinz had been gone from the very beginning.
Regarding the design of German war cemeteries, is they try to match the surrounding architecture and blend into the landscape. So if you're ever at a German war cemetery, keep an eye out for that. For example, you can see that here in the cemetery in Lommel. It's another example where they've gone ahead and done that. The story that I want to share with you guys now is about a pilot whose service began during the Spanish Civil War. Let's go to his cross and let's hear his story.
Walter Adolph was born on the 11th of June 1913 in Romania, moving to Germany with his family while he was still a child. His combat experience began long before the Second World War. By the spring of 1938, he had already served with the Corridor Legion during the Spanish Civil War, where he claimed his first aerial victory. He went on to fly through opening phases of the Second World War, surviving the skies over Britain and France. In September of 1941, Walter was only 28 years old, yet he was a seasoned veteran. He commanded an entire fighter group, had flown 79 combat missions, and was credited with more than 20 aerial victories. Those figures are important to mention because they show us the kind of experienced pilot that Walter was. They're not here to glorify his actions, but it's a reminder to show us, regardless of the amount of experience that one person has, the dirty hands of war can reach everyone involved. The innocent and the belligerent. The mission that ultimately took Walter's life occurred on the 18th of September 1941. Walter led 8 Focke-Wulf 190s over the Belgian coast, intercepting a Royal Air Force attack near Balkenberge. In the chaotic fighting that followed, his plane was struck, and he went down over the channel, roughly 30 kilometers off the coast of Ostend. The victory is generally credited to British pilot officer Cyril Babbage. And with that fatal hit, Walter's plane became the very first Focke-Wulf 190 ever lost in aerial combat. For more than 3 weeks, Walter was simply listed as missing. Then, on the 12th of October, his body finally washed ashore near Knokke. He was eventually laid to rest here at Lommel, in Block 38, grave 459. Walter Adolph was just 28 years old. He had survived years of flying and dozens of combat missions. But in the end, neither rank nor experience could shield him from the relentless violence of this war. And his life, too, was ended through it.
The next story that I want to highlight with you guys shows that not everybody who's buried here in Lommel died during combat. This is a story about a German baker who was the baker for his unit, and we're going to find out what happened to him.
Not every man buried at Lommel was killed in combat. Rudolf Lüddecke was 37 years old when his life ended. He left behind his wife, Emmy, and their young daughter named Christa. His story shows how war could take a life without a single shot being fired. Goose is going to explain what happened to him.
Rudolf Lüddecke was born on January 11, 1903, as one of 6 children. His father was a self-employed merchant. He got married in 1933 and in 1935 he had a daughter named Christa. He was a master baker as profession. When he was called up in 1939, he was assigned to Bakery Company 216. Bakery Company 216 was stationed in Ludwigshafen. He and his company had to march from Ludwigshafen to Antwerp, a 500-kilometer march that took about 3 weeks. 2 days after he arrived in Antwerp, he had a stroke and died on the 22nd of May 1940. His daughter Christa always said the reason he died was because of that long march.
Rudolf had suffered a cerebral infection and died in a military hospital near Antwerp. His father wanted his son's body brought home, but Rudolf was instead buried near Antwerp. In 1949, his remains were moved here to Lommel, where he now rests in Block 49, grave 595. But for his daughter Christa, her father's story did not end there. In 1956, when she was 21 years old, she documented a journey to the war graves in 16 pages and 43 photographs. Together with the biography she later created, those records preserve the story we can tell today. Rudolf was not killed in battle. He was a master baker, a husband, and a father whose life ended far from home because of the demands of war that were placed upon him. Christa was left with photographs, documents, and a grave in another country, but ultimately Christa was left without the father who should have come home, the man who should have been there to raise her, watch her grow, and guide her through life. Instead, Rudolf became another casualty of a war that took millions of lives and forever changed countless others.
That's why I wanted to share Rudolph's story with you guys, because as we can see, he didn't die in combat. He died from a long march, and his daughter remembers that march probably for the rest of her life. As she says in her letters, it was that march who killed her father. So it's one of those stories that add to the humanity of places like this. It really reminds you that each cross has a story behind it. 39,000 stories, 39,000 dreams. I think it's generally fascinating, and don't take this the wrong way, but what an impact that tiny Belgium had on Germany during the First and Second World War. You know, Belgium is famously refusing Germany entering their country and giving them a bloody nose as they tried to march through during the Schlieffen Plan. And Germany needed to go through Belgium, and they just pleaded to let the Belgians line up on the road. And the Belgians said no and fought back. And then in World War II, again, Belgium plays a pretty important role. You know, I mean, obviously the most famous one from World War II is the Battle of the Bulge Bastogne, but it's interesting. When I'm in the country of Belgium, it's such a tiny country, but it has such immense, important history, especially in modern history. For me, it's personally interesting to see that there's a good majority of casualties who are buried from the Battle of the Bulge here. That's because last December, I went to Sandweiler in Luxembourg, the German cemetery, as well as the one right outside of Foy, Riconi. And there's also casualties buried from those same battles. So it's interesting to see how different places the German casualties are spread out.
The stories we have looked at today reveal starkly different lives among the men buried here at Lommel. But it must be said clearly, some of those resting in this cemetery took part in horrific crimes against the Belgian people and others during the Second World War. Examining individual lives does not lessen those atrocities. Understanding a person's history is never an excuse for their actions or the regime that they served. Understanding does not mean absolution. Yet, looking at the history on a human level, at choices, families, and consequences allows us to develop a deeper understanding of the past. I would like to thank the Volksbund, the German War Graves Commission, for preserving sites like Lommel, not as places of glorification, but as places of mourning, reflection, and education. Their work allows the dead to rest with dignity while ensuring that these difficult truths are preserved and passed on to future generations. Standing here among nearly 40,000 graves, war ceases to be an abstract statistic. Here, it's true human cost that surrounds you. I'd also like to take a moment to thank you for watching this video. If you thought this video added some historical or educational value, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button so we can continue learning together. Also, take a moment of your day to look up organizations like the Volksbund, the German War Graves Commission, and the important work that they do. Thank you for watching.